Let's get right to what America is talking about. The battle of the branches. Tonight, we are watching a fight between the president and the courts that could lightly shove the country into a constitutional calamity.
It's a shame what's happening, Mark. It's really a shame. But judges should be ruling. They shouldn't be dictating what you're supposed to be doing.
Judges should be doing exactly that, ruling about what is legal and what a president can and cannot do, at least since 1803 and Marbury versus Madison, which quite literally says it is emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. The president, as you heard, doesn't believe that. When a decision defies what he believes the law should be, this is really important, though, because judges do keep telling Trump no. And there are some clues that Donald Trump and his people are saying, don't listen. The Trump administration has apparently kept billions of federal dollars frozen despite a judge's orders. The administration has also apparently not reinstated some USAID workers who were put on leave. That's also despite a judge's order. And so now the country gets to find out what happens when Trump's unstoppable executive force of will meets the immovable object of a co-equal judiciary that says over and over again that he's breaking the law. Joining us in our fifth seat is CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig. He's a former state and federal prosecutor, also our legal guru here at CNN. So I quoted Marbury versus Madison. You tell me, you tell me what you make of this idea that the Trump administration is saying the courts don't have a role here.
Well, they're wrong, for sure. I mean, let me get sort of two areas here that are out of bounds. It is not a constitutional crisis for a new president to come in and issue a spate of executive orders, even if liberals hate those executive orders. That's not a constitutional crisis. Also, not a constitutional crisis for scores of federal judges to block some or all of those. Again, that's the way our system is supposed to work. I try to keep this phrase constitutional crisis behind heavy glass. And I only use it when the question, what happens next, when we don't have an answer to that. We are not at that point yet. Donald Trump and his administration have gotten a whole slew of really bad rulings that they really hate. And they're making a lot of noises about defying them, but they have not done that yet. Their next step, which they are doing, is appealing.
Elie, can I ask you, though? I mean, two judges said you're not complying with this ruling. So what do you make of that?
But those are sort of technical disputes that are not uncommon in cases where the judge said you have to unfreeze spending, and then some was frozen and some was unfrozen. That's the kind of thing that ordinarily gets ironed out in the course of litigation. But where we're going to have a problem is if people in the administration pick up on the clues that J.D. Vance sort of very unsubtly left in his tweet, where he basically said, if judges tell us what to do, that's illegal.
Let me read the tweet just so people understand. He wrote this on Sunday. If a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general and how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. The word legitimate is doing a lot of work here, but we do know that judges do get to say whether the executive is complying with the law or not. That's been the case for decades, hundreds of years.
Well, I think there's a difference between saying whether you're complying with the law, and then you have these individual district court judges setting effectively broad federal policy that is specifically reserved for the president of the United States. I think we do have a constitutional crisis, and it's being caused by these judges. They're not here to tell us. They're not here to tell us how to spend the money. They're not here to set broad federal policy. That is the president's job as elected by the people. These judges are supposed to be settling discrete, specific matters, not policy setting. I think Vance is right. I think Trump has a point. And these judges want nothing more to continue the lawfare against
I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to hear that you think Trump is right.
They're doing this on
However, just on a real important technical point here, one of the main disputes is whether the executive branch can just decide not to spend money that another co-equal branch has said ought to be spent. So it's not just about forcing the federal government to spend money. It's saying Congress said you need to spend this money this way, and the executive branch saying, no, I don't feel like it, and the courts say you have to.
Well, my answer to that simply is It is the executive branch's job to figure out how to spend money once it is appropriated by Congress. And sometimes they spend money that's not been appropriated, but the correct political control
We
is
will-
between the executive and the
I
Congress,
want to
not some random
I want to
federal
return
judge.
to
you
that
really
because
think-
that is also a major legal question. But
Do you
go ahead.
really think that JD Vance's tweet is only about these district judges?
I think
This
yes.
is about, no, this is a slippery
it's the first-
slope
it's the first
because
piece.
they're going to move on to what the next ruling is. They're setting the stage so that they can say that the executive branch has control now over the judicial branch. They're setting the stage.
No,
And for people
I
who think,
disagree.
that President Trump has not planned all of this, he pushes the envelope constantly. There was January 6th. He has a myriad of people out there that would support the executive branch being able to rule over the judicial branch because there have been no repercussions. And when there are not consequences and when there are not repercussions, you get away with
I
it.
get it. You want individual federal judges who hate Donald Trump
No, I don't.
to tie him up for 4 years.
No, I don't.
If you want a big
Not at
policy
all.
questions decided, let the Supreme Court do it. But in the interim, the executive has to be allowed to
Pray
govern.
tell, how do we get to the Supreme Court? Can
Just
somebody
appeal,
tell me?
and that's fine. But you
Okay,
can't tie him
okay,
up
we get
until
to
it
the
gets
Supreme
there.
Court.
You can't tie him up
We get
until
to
it
the
gets there.
Supreme Court by the judges ruling, things going to appeal, and then it goes
And in the
up-
meantime, what happens? Trump can't act.
In the
Trump can't
in the
act.
meantime, you're supposed to comply with the court's rulings. Am I wrong about that?
Well, you're supposed to comply, but Scott's absolutely right in that the court cannot say you have to spend these dollars today. So as a governor, I dealt with this. We got things challenged in state court and federal court. It's all judge shopped, by the way. Judges don't randomly get these cases. There's a reason that these cases are filed in Boston, the Boston court, or a
Rhode
certain
Island.
district, Rhode Island, because they know they're going to get a judge that
That's
is
a
politically
great
favorable.
bipartisan practice as well.
Yeah. Oh, both sides do it. I mean, I think
How many times that district court and judge one guy in Texas shut down Joe Biden?
But you raise the right point. Should the president, the singular president,
actually
should he have to
went
share
along
the
with what the
should
judge
he
said.
have to share the presidency with 300 district court judges? No,
And
absolutely
like,
not.
But the point, though, you made a really good point that there have been judges that shut down some of President Biden's executive actions, and they understand, the Biden administration understood
And he ignored
the
it.
checks and
The
balances.
Supreme
But
Court
not-
tried to stop
but
me,
not
but they
in
never
the-
will.
but
Who
not in
said
the way that Donald
Who said
Trump
that?
is.
Who said
Not
that?
in the way
Yeah,
that
Joe
Donald
Biden.
Yeah,
Joe
but
Biden.
Donald Trump
Scott,
is-
he actually didn't ignore it.
He
That's
did.
right.
They continue to
No,
plow
no,
forward with
no,
student
he
aid. How
didn't.
much did
No,
they spend?
no,
No,
Let me set the
Scott,
record on
He
this.
actually got
He
deep
was
into
in-
the
I-
student
I
loan
hated
debt
the student
Yeah.
loan forgiveness
What
policy.
did he say
Hold
out
on.
loud?
I thought
What
it
did he
was
say
I
out
thought it
loud?
was a ridiculous
didn't
policy.
ignore it.
I thought it was unconstitutional. I predicted it would get struck down. It did get struck down, and I
He didn't
applauded.
ignore it.
He did not ignore it, though. He went and tried under a different law.
So he ignored
You're
it.
allowed. No,
That's
that's
not ignoring it.
Yeah,
That
so
is
he was
trying
not
to
ignoring
be
it. He was
literally
trying to do it.
defied.
He was
You
trying to
literally
do it.
defied
But let me just understand where you stand. If a district court judge rules in a way that the president dislikes, should the president listen or should the president defy?
If a district court judge tries to usurp the authority of the chief executive of this country, he should absolutely defy it. There's a difference between broad policy decisions and discrete disputes between parties. That's the difference.
If
If
it-
I want a policy decided, I'll take it to the
But what
Supreme
about checks
Court.
and balances?
Well, Scott, you're
What
all
Of a-
about
of a
checks and
district
balances?
court judge?
What I
Who
can't
elected
what I
them?
can't get with is you talking in these bizarre, broad generalities.
It's not bizarre.
Every single one of these cases deals with a discrete issue. Okay, it deals with funding. It deals with with certain constitutionally or statutorily appointed roles. Every single one of these things is a distinct thing, and they're all being dealt with by different judges. So it's not broad swaths of policy here.
It
When the
is.
court says Congress, appropriated this money, you must unfreeze it while we litigate this. Why can't Trump comply with that?
So you're saying that a judge should decide how and when money is
A
spent
judge is saying
for years and not the president of the
Look,
United
Scott,
States?
let me explain
You're a governor,
little bit
you
more.
know.
Let me explain it a little bit more slowly. A judge is saying
You don't have to talk to me like that.
Congress.
I have a position on this. If you have an
Okay.
opinion, we can
Yeah,
disagree.
but I'm saying you listen to me because you're not listening and you're making claims that are not connected to the facts. The judge is saying
Maybe you are.
Congress appropriated a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
We need to litigate this.
Okay.
While we litigate this, we're going to put a hold on the actions that you took that might be unconstitutional.
So while we
That's
litigate,
part of the
while we
process.
litigate
Why
this,
can't-
I'm
why
a
does it
judge
not
and
work?
I'm in charge of the executive branch and you're not, forget it. I
You
totally
just
disagree.
can't compel the executive branch to spend the dollars. You can't do that. They
Okay.
can't say we're going to start. The
Have
judges
you
are gonna
heard
start
of
writing
the
the checks. They have every
impoundment?
right to
Have you
hold
heard of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974?
that. No.
Okay, well, let me play this. let me play
By the
this.
way, none of your viewers have
Okay,
either.
well, I'm
I can explain it in a
I'm gonna play this clip for you. This is in Congress Russ Vought, who is the architect of a lot of this, was being questioned in Congress about the Impoundment Control Act, which actually says that the executive branch should spend the money how Congress appropriated it. Here's what he said is going on right now in the federal government.
Do you believe the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is the law of the land that you must follow?
It is the law of the land. As you know, the president has run on that issue. He believes it's unconstitutional. For 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend less than an appropriation if they could do it for less. And we have seen the extent to which this law has contributed to waste, fraud, and abuse.
So Ellie, this is the law of the land. They might be wanting to challenge it, but it is the law.
Right. The Impoundment Control Act says essentially the president cannot block money allocated by Congress. To the power of district court judges, and I understand your point, Scott. I understand the frustration people have when a district court judge blocks a broad mandate from the chief executive, the elected chief executive. Ultimately, the big issues go up to the Supreme Court. But I guess I would ask both of you, what if a district court judge had blocked Barack Obama's DACA plan, the Dreamers plan, right? And he said, heck with you, I'm doing it anyway. Would you be okay with that? Or would you have a problem with that?
No,
Would that be okay?
So again, that's where we're forgetting a key piece of the third branch of government. That's where Congress steps in.
Yes.
Right? You have to remember that a judge can't just say, well, I'm going to arbitrarily block something. They say, I'm blocking it because of this, and Congress can step in and be more specific and more refined if they want
Well,
to.
how does that work with
but how does that-
Congress, who's
right.
appropriated funds for all of these other agencies?
So it can't work
And
that
now,
way.
and now the executive branch is
$20
stepping
million
on Congress.
if Congress appropriates $20 million for a program, do you, as the chief executive, do I have to spend $20 million on that program?
Well, actually, this is
But
what
do
I'm
I?
trying to, this is why I
Because
brought,
if I don't,
I know
what's
that
the
the- I
number?
know that
Why not do a
impoundment-
bit of an
hold on,
investigation into it first?
I know that the
You don't have
Impoundment
to.
Control Act thing
Executive.
sounds really wonky, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I understand the idea of testing laws. You want to see how far you can go. But the question that you are asking has been answered by the courts, okay? The reason that the Impoundment Control Act exists is to say that when Congress says we appropriate this money, it should be spent that way. That's
No.
their power. They have the
Look,
power of
every
the
state in the
purse.
country, when we pass a balanced budget, and I'll explain what a balanced budget is to
Again,
everyone in
it's a
Washington in a minute.
dispute, but I'm
We don't
saying
spend- this
that
called a
hasn't
lapse.
been proven
There's
in the
hundreds of millions of
courts.
dollars in New Hampshire that intentionally do not get spent on certain programs.
What
It's
about
just a lapse back into the
when the
system.
Trump administration says to Congress, you created this agency, we're going to just decide it doesn't exist anymore?
Again, he runs the executive branch. He can decide who works for the executive
So
branch.
where
He
does
can
this
decide who
where does
doesn't.
this end? So
It doesn't.
Congress creates an agency, the executive says, to heck with it. Congress appropriates money, the executive branch says, to heck with it. Where does this end?
So it ends, you can go back and I like what they're doing, and they're going to whiteboard these programs out, and they're going to force each of these departments to come back and actually justify their existence, which no one in Washington has done for decades. If you want NIH money to go forward, explain to me why, how, and how it's
Okay.
going to be spent.
All right, so the next
That's all. They're
Democratic
going to
president
force
who
them to the
says
table.
ICE is going to just disappear,
Let-
I expect that the
Let-
two of you
let
will
me-
say that
I
sounds
think all of America would say.
Look, no matter who the president is, the duly elected chief executive of this country, they should not be sharing the broad plenary powers of the presidency with 300 individual district court judges. That is not what the people
That is a
want.
great
What
position
about-
to take when you are in power.
Yeah,
but when
I
you
will
are
believe
not
it
in
no matter what.
power,
District
when
court
you are
judges
not
are
in
different than the
power,
Supreme Court.
it's
When the
a totally
Democratic
different
president,
situation.
are you going to continue to have that?
I
talking
don't
point,
believe district court judges have more power than the chief executive
Why can't
president of the
All right,
United
don't
States.
you
We
think
will
that's setting
hold,
a
we will
precedent
hold you to
for the
that,
Supreme
Scott
Court?
Jennings.
Good luck